The first truck arrived just after sunrise. Its engine rumbled through the quiet valley, kicking up clouds of red dust as it crawled toward a small farm on the outskirts of Stellenbosch, South Africa. The driver backed the truck into an empty corner of the property, pulled a lever, and thousands of bruised, rotten apples came crashing to the ground with a dull thud. Some of the apples were overripe. Others had burred pecks, deep bruises, or soft spots that made them impossible to sell in supermarkets. A few were already beginning to ferment under the warm African sun. The driver climbed down from the truck and looked at the woman standing nearby. "You sure you want all this?" he asked. She smiled without hesitation. "Every single one." The driver shrugged. "Well, it's your farm." As the truck disappeared down the dirt road, curious neighbors gathered along the fence. "I've seen people grow vegetables, grapes, peaches, even flowers," he muttered. "But I've never seen someone start a business with garbage." A group of teenagers passing on bicycles burst into laughter. "Hey, Naledi," one of them shouted. "Opening a rubbish dump?" The others laughed as they rode away. Naledi Makona didn't answer. Instead, she picked up one of the damaged apples, wiped away the dirt with her sleeve, and studied it carefully. To everyone else, it was worthless. To her, it looked like an opportunity. She just didn't know exactly how yet. Only 3 years earlier, Naledi's life had looked very different. After her father passed away, she inherited the family's modest 8-hectare farm. It wasn't much. The fences were falling apart. The irrigation system barely worked. The old tractor broke down more often than it ran. Years of drought had left the soil exhausted, and every planting season seemed harder than the last. Many people thought she was stubborn. Her older brother had already moved to Johannesburg, insisting there was no future in farming. Her cousins encouraged her to do the same. "There's nothing left here," they told her. "Take the money, sell the land, and start over." But every evening, Naledi would stand on the small hill overlooking the farm and remember something her father often said. "Land doesn't betray people. People give up on the land too soon." Those words stayed with her. Even when the bank rejected her application for another operating loan. Even when rising fuel prices doubled her expenses. Even when her tomato harvest failed after an unexpected heat wave. She believed there had to be another way. She simply hadn't found it yet. About 6 kilometers from her farm stood one of the largest commercial apple orchards in the region. The orchard was impressive. Perfect rows of apple trees stretched across the hills for what seemed like forever. Every harvest season, hundreds of workers picked thousands of tons of fruit. Only the best apples made it into supermarkets. Slightly bruised apples became juice. The rest were considered worthless. Every week during harvest, truckloads of damaged fruit were hauled away to disposal sites. The company paid thousands of rands simply to get rid of them. One afternoon, while delivering vegetables to a local market, Naledi overheard 2 orchard employees talking. "I swear," one man complained, "we spend more money dumping apples than we do growing some of them." His co-worker laughed. "Maybe someone will pay us for rotten fruit one day." The joke made everyone nearby chuckle. Everyone except Naledi. She stopped walking. Her mind started racing. If the orchard was paying to throw the apples away, what if someone collected them instead? It sounded ridiculous. But then again, every successful idea sounds ridiculous before it works. That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She searched through old farming books her father had collected over decades. She read about composting, animal feed, fermentation. Then she stumbled across a faded notebook tucked inside an old wooden cabinet. The cover was worn, and the pages had yellowed with age. Inside, written in neat handwriting, was her late grandmother's collection of traditional recipes. Homemade jams, dried fruit, fruit wines, and one recipe that immediately caught her attention. Traditional apple cider vinegar. Naledi stared at the page for several minutes. Apples, water, sugar, time. She smiled. The next morning, she drove straight to the orchard's office. The receptionist looked confused when she explained why she was there. "You want to speak to the operations manager about our rotten apples?" Naledi nodded confidently. A few minutes later, she found herself sitting across from the manager, who listened politely before breaking into a laugh. "I am. You actually want the apples we throw away?" "Yes." The manager leaned back in his chair. He expected her to change her mind. Instead, she reached across the desk. "Deal." She had no investors, no factory, no equipment, only an old family recipe, and a farm full of fruit that nobody else wanted. The first truckload arrived 2 days later. Naledi stood at the edge of her farm as nearly 4 tons of bruised, overripe apples tumbled onto the ground. Some were still firm enough to eat, but most were scarred by hail, pecked by birds, or softened from days in storage. As the driver climbed back into his truck, he smiled politely. "Good luck," he said. "You'll need it." Her neighbors noticed immediately. Children stopped along the roadside, pointing toward the growing pile of apples. A woman from the neighboring farm wrinkled her nose as she walked past. "Naledi has finally lost her mind," she whispered to a friend. Another farmer chuckled. "She'll attract more flies than customers." The comments stung, but Naledi ignored them. She had grown used to people doubting her. Ever since taking over her father's farm, she had heard every criticism imaginable. "You're too young. You're a woman trying to run a farm alone. You should sell before you lose everything." She had learned that opinions were easy to give. Results were much harder to produce. The recipe was simple, but it wasn't detailed enough for commercial production. It assumed the reader already understood fermentation. She didn't. Still, she was determined to try. She washed the best of the damaged apples, trimmed away the rotten portions, chopped the fruit into small pieces, and filled several large food-grade barrels. She added clean water and sugar, stirred the mixture with a wooden paddle, covered each barrel with cheesecloth, and waited. Every morning before sunrise, she checked the barrels. Tiny bubbles appeared after a few days. But her excitement didn't last. Another smelled like spoiled garbage. A third attracted clouds of fruit flies after a tear appeared in the cloth covering. Weeks of work had been ruined. She dumped every failed batch into her compost pile. Watching the liquid disappear into the soil felt like pouring away her last bit of hope. Most people would have stopped there. Naledi almost did. That evening, she sat alone on the front porch, staring across the fields as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The wind carried the scent of eucalyptus trees, just as it had when her father was alive. She remembered something he used to tell her whenever a harvest failed. A farmer who quits after one bad season never discovers the good one waiting ahead. She smiled sadly. "I wish you were here," she whispered. Then she stood up. Tomorrow, she would try again. This time, she decided guessing wasn't enough. If she wanted to build a real business, she needed to understand the science behind fermentation. The following week, she drove nearly an hour to an agricultural training center outside Parle. Most of the students were decades younger than her. Some glanced curiously at the farmer in muddy boots carrying a notebook. She didn't care. During a workshop on food preservation, she introduced herself to a lecturer named Peter. "I'm trying to make apple cider vinegar, and every batch keeps failing." Instead of laughing, Peter smiled. "Tell me exactly what you're doing." For nearly 30 minutes, Naledi described every step. "You aren't failing because the idea is bad," he explained. Naledi frowned. "What do you mean?" He picked up a marker and began drawing on the whiteboard. First, natural yeast turns the sugars into alcohol. He drew an arrow. Then special bacteria convert the alcohol into acetic acid. That's your vinegar. Another arrow. If the temperature is wrong, the yeast struggles. If your equipment isn't clean, harmful microbes take over. If there's not enough oxygen, the bacteria can't finish the process. "It isn't luck," he said. "It's biology." For the first time, everything made sense. She wasn't making random mistakes. She simply didn't understand the invisible workers doing the real job. Back home, Naledi scrubbed every barrel until it sparkled. She sanitized every tool. She built simple wooden racks to keep the containers off the ground. She covered each barrel with clean, breathable cloth and labeled them with dates. Instead of rushing, she became patient. Every day she recorded temperatures, smells, colors, and changes in a notebook. The process became less like cooking. Weeks passed. This batch looked different. It smelled fresh, sweet at first, then slightly alcoholic. Finally, crisp and pleasantly sour. One afternoon, she dipped a clean spoon into the barrel and tasted a single drop. Her eyes widened. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time, it tasted like real apple cider vinegar. After months of failure, endless criticism, and more wasted apples than she cared to count, she had finally proven one thing. The impossible wasn't impossible. She was simply learning. But making great vinegar was only half the battle. Now she faced an even bigger challenge. How could she convince people to buy a product made from fruit everyone believed belonged in the trash? Naledi held the glass bottle up to the morning sunlight. The golden liquid shimmered like liquid amber. She slowly twisted off the cap and breathed in. It smelled clean, bright. There was a gentle sweetness from the apples, followed by the sharp tang that only naturally fermented vinegar could produce. She dipped a teaspoon into the bottle and tasted it again. This time, she smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Months of failure, disappointment, and ridicule had finally produced something she could be proud of. She filled 20 recycled glass bottles, carefully washed and sterilized, then wrote simple handwritten labels. Naledi's Farm Apple Cider Vinegar. Naturally fermented. Made from rescued apples. The labels weren't fancy. She couldn't afford professional packaging. She couldn't afford a designer. She couldn't even afford a proper printer. But she believed the quality inside the bottle would speak louder than the label. She just needed someone willing to taste it. The market was already buzzing. Fresh bread filled the air with its warm aroma. Flower vendors arranged colorful bouquets. Cheesemakers stacked their wheels neatly on wooden tables. Honey producers offered free samples to passing families. Compared to everyone else, Naledi's stall looked almost empty. Just 20 bottles, a handwritten sign, and a hopeful smile. The first hour passed without a single sale. People stopped briefly, looked at the bottles, then continued walking. Some asked the price. Most thought it was too expensive. "I can buy vinegar cheaper at the supermarket," one woman said before walking away. Another man glanced at the label and laughed. "Rescued apples? So, this is made from bad fruit." Naledi smiled politely. From apples that supermarkets rejected because of how they looked, not because they weren't good. The man shrugged. "I'll stick with the supermarket brand." She watched him disappear into the crowd. By lunchtime, only one bottle had sold. She began wondering if everyone had been right. Maybe no one wanted a premium product made from unwanted fruit. Maybe her idea belonged in the compost heap after all. Just as she started packing her bottles away, a middle-aged man wearing a chef's jacket stopped at her table. He picked up a bottle and read the label carefully. "May I taste it?" Naledi quickly poured a small sample into a tiny cup. The chef swirled it, smelled it, then took a sip. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he smiled. "This isn't ordinary vinegar." Naledi felt her heart race. "No," she replied softly. "It ferments naturally for several weeks." The chef nodded. He looked at her. "Do you make this yourself?" "Every bottle." He reached into his wallet. "I'll take 6. Naledi blinked. 6. "And if my customers like it?" He handed her a business card. "I'll need a lot more." His name was Chef Andre Bota, owner of one of Stellenbosch's most respected farm-to-table restaurants. That single conversation changed everything. A week later, Chef Andre called. "The salad dressing was incredible. I'd like another 30 bottles." Naledi nearly dropped the phone. 30 bottles. She had never made that many at once. But she accepted the order anyway. For the next 2 weeks, she barely slept. She washed bottles, prepared fresh batches, checked fermentation barrels before sunrise, labeled bottles late into the night. When she finally delivered the order, the chef shook her hand. "You've got something special here. But don't sell vinegar." Naledi looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Sell your story." He pointed toward the orchard across the valley. "People love great food, but they remember great stories. You aren't just making vinegar. You're rescuing food. You're reducing waste. You're helping farmers. That's what people will buy." Those words stayed with her. The following month, Naledi redesigned her labels. Across the front, she printed one simple sentence. "From fruit others rejected, crafted into something extraordinary." How thousands of perfectly edible apples were discarded simply because they were bruised, too small, or slightly misshapen. How traditional fermentation transformed overlooked fruit into something valuable. Customers loved it. Some bought 1 bottle, then returned for 3 more. Others posted photos online. Food bloggers began writing about her. Local newspapers featured the woman turning discarded apples into premium vinegar. Then tourists. Then specialty grocery stores. Demand grew faster than she could produce. Her tiny shed wasn't enough anymore. She needed larger fermentation tanks. More storage. better equipment, and for the first time in years, she wasn't wondering how to survive. She was wondering how to grow. But success brought a new challenge. The orchard that once gave her free apples was beginning to realize those worthless apples had become incredibly valuable. Would they continue giving them away? Or would her greatest opportunity suddenly disappear? The phone rang just after sunrise. Nality wiped her hands on her apron and answered. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was the operations manager from the orchard. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she feared the worst. Had they decided to stop supplying the apples? Were they going to charge her? Without those apples, her business would struggle to survive. "I'll be there this afternoon," she replied. As she drove through the orchard's endless rows of apple trees, memories flooded back. This was the same place where people had laughed when she asked for their discarded fruit. The same office where the manager had joked about anyone wanting rotten apples. Only now, things were different. The manager welcomed her with a warm smile. "I've been hearing a lot about your vinegar," he said. "Our staff keeps seeing it in restaurants and specialty shops." Nality smiled nervously. "I'm grateful you gave me a chance." The manager leaned forward. "You've solved a problem we've had for years." He slid a folder across the desk. "Instead of paying thousands of rand every harvest to dispose of rejected apples, we'd rather work with you." Nality looked up. "You mean, we'd like a partnership?" The agreement was simple. The orchard would continue supplying rejected apples on a regular schedule. In return, Nality would collect them quickly, keeping the orchard clean and reducing disposal costs. It wasn't just a handshake anymore. It was a business relationship. For the first time, she had a reliable supply of raw materials. And the orchard had transformed a costly waste problem into a sustainable solution. Both sides won. With a steady supply of apples, Nality could finally think beyond survival. She converted an old equipment shed into a dedicated fermentation room. Rows of stainless steel tanks replaced the plastic barrels she had started with. New bottling equipment allowed her to produce hundreds of bottles each week instead of dozens. It was about people. The first person she hired was Thandi, a single mother who had been unemployed for nearly 2 years. Then came Sifo, a young man eager to learn about food production. Soon after, an elderly neighbor who had once laughed at Nality asked if she needed part-time help sorting apples. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. Before long, the tiny farm employed 10 people from the local community. Families who had once struggled to find work now had steady incomes. Children returned to school with new uniforms. Local shops saw more customers. One idea had begun to lift an entire community. As production increased, Nality refused to forget the lesson that had started it all. Waste still had value. She looked around the farm and asked herself a simple question. What else are we throwing away? The peels and stems were composted and returned to the soil, improving the health of her fields. The seeds were donated to an agricultural research program studying resilient apple varieties. Nothing was wasted. Visitors from universities, farming organizations, and environmental groups began touring her farm. They wanted to understand her way of thinking. During one workshop, a student asked, "What made you believe rotten apples could become something valuable?" Nality smiled before answering. "I didn't believe in the apples. I believed that nature doesn't create waste. We do." The room fell silent. Those words stayed with many of the young farmers who visited her. Demand continued to grow. Her vinegar was now sold in gourmet food stores across South Africa. Restaurants proudly listed it on their menus. Health-conscious consumers appreciated its natural fermentation and rich flavor. Tourists traveling through the Cape Winelands often stopped at her farm, not just to buy vinegar, but to hear the story behind it. Many left inspired. They realized they weren't holding an ordinary bottle. They were holding proof that problems could become opportunities. She had paid off the farm's debts, expanded her production facility, created local jobs, and built a respected brand founded on sustainability, quality, and hope. One crisp autumn morning, the orchard manager visited her farm. He walked slowly through the fermentation room, watching workers bottle fresh batches of vinegar. Outside, another truck unloaded a mountain of bruised apples. The manager laughed. "You know," he said, "we used to spend money trying to get rid of these." Nality picked up one of the imperfect apples and turned it in her hand. "It was never worthless," she replied. "We just hadn't discovered its purpose." The manager nodded thoughtfully. It's funny. Sometimes perfection isn't profitable. Nality smiled. As the sun began to set over the valley, Nality stood on the same hill where she had once wondered whether she would lose the family farm. The fields below were alive with activity. Workers loaded delivery trucks. Visitors wandered through the orchard. The sweet scent of fermenting apples drifted gently through the evening air. She thought about her father, about the countless times he had refused to give up, even when the future looked uncertain. His words echoed once more in her heart. Land doesn't betray people. People give up on the land too soon. He had been right. The land had never failed her. It simply asked her to see possibilities where others saw problems. And that became the foundation of everything she built. Every day, the world throws away millions of opportunities disguised as imperfections. Sometimes they're bruised apples. Sometimes they're broken ideas. The difference between failure and success often isn't what you have. It's what you're willing to see. So the next time someone tells you something has no value, look a little closer. Because hidden inside what the world rejects may be the opportunity that transforms your life. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that great success often begins where everyone else stops looking. After all, one person's waste can become another person's legacy.